back to Sledgehammer Horror, guys. I am Ken Sledge, and let's talk horror. Today, I am joined by, once again, good friend of mine of the Daily Dead and also of Corpse Club. We have Jonathan James. Jonathan, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me back. I'm excited.
Oh, man, I'm so amped. I sent an email hoping I could get you back, and we actually finally made it work on something we could both agree on here with this franchise ranking. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about you. For the people that missed the last episode, what can you tell us about the Daily Dead and about Corpse Club a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I'm the editor in chief and founder of Daily Dead. Been around 10 years, celebrate our 10th anniversary in November, which was exciting. And we've been covering horror news every day since, like I said, since November 2010. And Corpse Club is our podcast. And we've been running that for about 2 years now, release almost every single week. And that's been a lot of fun for us too.
And I have all the social media links, the website, the podcast, all down here in the description, so you guys can check it out. Highly recommend you checking these guys out. They are, if you're a horror fan, you will not be disappointed in what you're hearing with these guys. So before we get started again, sir, I want to say thank you so much, Jonathan, for doing this with me. I'm very interested and very intrigued to know your ranking of the Insidious franchise. I say this before every episode, but I mean it with every ounce of genuineness, if that's a word, in my body. I don't know his ranking. He doesn't know mine. So I feel it's more fun that way. It's more genuine. So here we go. Let's start with you. You're number 4 of the, and we are just doing the main franchise, Insidious 1 through chapter 4. So your number 4 would be.
Okay, so my number 4, my least favorite of the series, after having just watched them again, because I'm like, well, we're going to be talking about them. It's no fair for me to, think about the last time I watched them on Blu-ray. So I watched them all recently. And and also I'll caveat it with this. I think there is a difference for me between what may be the best made film and what may be my favorite. And so
Sure.
I would say that even though I think it's a very well made film, my least favorite of the 4 is Insidious Chapter 2.
Oh, okay. Insidious chapter 2. Okay. My least favorite is Insidious chapter 3. So I'm going a little bit different here with that. What are some of your pros and cons about Insidious chapter 2?
Well, you know what? I mean, I think that the big pro for Insidious Chapter 2, it's directed by James Wan. I mean, he makes, as we all know by now, I mean, he makes wonderful horror movies. And even if it's not my favorite, there's still so much to like about it. It looks gorgeous. The sound is great. The character development, the acting. I think one of the big disconnects for me, and this goes back, and that's why I say, it's always a personal, taste for everybody. But for me, I kind of, read the first movie as a bit of a different ending. And then we see two, which is it shows us what happens. I love in one, it's kind of like you don't know what happens. It's left
Right.
up to your imagination. I think it's one of the great things about that movie. That being said, I think that what they had some difficulty with in chapter 2 was they're playing with different timelines, and it just didn't seem like it packs the same punch that they did with the first. The first was just such an amazing movie that I just don't think they recaptured it exactly in the second one. And sequels are always hard, right?
Right. But and I love what you just said about the way number 1 ended with that ambiguity of how it ended and what is really going to happen when he says, "Don't worry, I'm here." And she turns around with a and then you cut to Insidious, that title card. So I definitely agree with you there. But I want to talk about 3 a little bit. My choice for number 4. I do like how they brought back Elise. I love how when she walks out in the road and you see the ghost waving at her and then she just gets hit by that car. I thought that, that one kind of caught me off guard. When Elise tells her, if you call out to one of the ghosts, you're calling out to, they can all hear you. Even though you're calling out to your mom, they can all, at the window after he jumped out and the dad looks out and he's like, oh, he jumped. And he comes back in and then she walks over and she looks out and he's right there and he reaches up and grabs her. That's another scene that really got me when we were watching it. And I'm with you. I just went back and rewatched all these as well. The Return of the Black Bride, even though this is before seeing the Black Bride again. Specs and Tucker meet Elise in this one. And Elise's death, the foreshadowing of it, how she's like that woman is always telling me that she's going to kill me and I'm going to die by her hands. Like, that's another thing that I love about this movie. Now, the cons to it, to me, it has the worst big ghost out of them. The man that with the mask, the oxygen mask, the man who can't breathe, as they call him. I think he's the worst big bad in the Insidious franchise. They do have a lot of easy jump scares where they're kind of predictable jump scares with the bell ringing and the stuff in the vent, the knocking on the wall. Anybody that watches horror movies knew when she was dancing and that person was waving at her that it wasn't her mom, it was a ghost, and so there was a lot of that. The further isn't as scary in this one, I feel, as it was in some of the other ones. When you got into the actual further, some of the incidents that happened weren't as big as some of the other ones. And the ghost has footprints, like those like mucky footprints. That's something that always kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And the biggest one for me is they actually kill this ghost by taking the oxygen mask off of it. That's just another thing for me that I wasn't that big of a fan of. But one last thing I want to say about chapter 3, in my opinion, one of the scariest things in the Insidious franchise is that ghost girl. That's the guy with the oxygen mask, the guy with the mask, his pet. When you see her walking and she doesn't have the hands or the legs and her face is, I think that's one of the scariest ghosts in the whole franchise. So that's another one that I really, really enjoyed, that scene of it. So I should have said this at the beginning, but spoiler alert, there are going to be spoilers in this.
Yes, for
And
sure.
this is a franchise that, even though I say 3 is my least favorite, I still feel it's very rewatchable. There is a rewatchability to every single one of these movies, in my opinion. I do genuinely like this franchise a lot. So
I agree. They're all highly rewatchable.
yeah, absolutely. So so that was my number 4. Let's go back to you. Your number 3 would be.
Okay, so my number 3, I keep going back and forth on this one, but I am going to say it's Insidious, The Last Key.
Okay.
So and again, we're talking about these, and like I said, what's interesting is that we like all of the movies in this series. So I
Mhm.
think it really was a little bit tough to kind of rank them. And I have to say that like I said, we talked about I talked about the expert filmmaker that James Wan is,
Yeah.
and there is just a look to those first 2 films, and I think that Lee Winnell is able to capture that a little bit closer in Insidious Chapter 3. And I think by the time we get to number 4, we lose some of that. And, I'm going to talk about some of the things that I really love about Insidious Chapter 1 later. But I mean, we do see a pull away from some of those great elements. The musical score that we saw throughout 1 and 2 isn't present in 4. And
Yeah.
there is like we do see less of the further, but it's a different type of the further, I guess. But even that looks slightly different. I mean, it's a different cinematographer. So I think all of those elements kind of made the movie feel a little disjointed from the others. That being said, I think it has one of my favorite stories, even though it's not, even though like I said, I would rank it as number 3. I really do love that they decided to lean in on Elise. And I actually think, even though I don't think it's as well executed as the other movies that we're going to discuss, or that I'm going to discuss on my list, I think the story's great, and I love that they leaned into this character, because I think very few franchises would have essentially given Elise her own movie. Here they did. I think they fleshed out a character. I think it is a beautiful, because it's a 2-movie prequel. I think it's a beautiful way to flesh out her story and expand that character. And so I really do like a lot of the things that they're working with. I guess where I also think it kind of doesn't succeed as much is in the scares. I don't think they were able to bring all of that together. But I do love the key demon. I do think that the fact that it goes in and it twists it, and they lose that voice. There's such a creepiness to it. It's such a cool character, and I just wish the overall film had been, just like I said, executed just a little bit more tightly. But again, still, I still really enjoy the movie. I just ended up seeing it again yesterday, and we had a lot of fun with it.
And I agree with you to the point to where my number 3 is Insidious: The Last Key. What you're talking about with the key ghost, I love what you're saying. How way he goes into the neck and he turns the key and takes the voice, and then goes into the heart and takes you essentially.
Yeah.
I do love that. I think that's a great idea. I think it's hilarious that in this franchise, we're up to the 4th movie now, and we're still following a character that died in the first one. Like to me,
Yeah.
it's just, that's funny to me that her character was that important that they kept going prequels just to explain her story even more because we all fell in love with that character. Um, the child abuse scenes with Elise as a child were really hard to watch. Um, for me, like watching, because I absolutely love Josh Stewart. I think Josh Stewart is super awesome. I love him in The Collector, The Collection.
Yeah.
And he played that awful, terrible human being so well in this one. Um, so that's another con for me. And I think this was the slowest moving of the bunch. Um, but when it comes to the pros, the mother being hanged, I think that scene is so powerful. How the rope or the electrical part comes down, and you see little Elise with her just white eyes, and the mom's being hanged in the background, and then the dad comes down and just finds her dead. I think Specs and Tucker absolutely shine in this one in comparison to the others. They're much more in the foreground in this one, and I think that they're a great team. Um, One thing in this movie that really got me is the girl in the laundry room when Elise sees her and she's like, "Oh, it's a ghost. Come out. My brother can't see you." And then the dad comes and it's like, "There's nobody here," which we later find out it was an alive girl. And the dad ends up beating her to death in the laundry with the cane. But the key ghost had taken over her father, just as he does later on in the movie with Garza. And, seeing that real girl to me, that was huge. Like, that's one of those things that I never expected that to happen in this movie. And that, obviously neither did Elise because she sees them as ghosts all the time. So to actually see this real girl, and when it hits her, she's like, I could have saved that girl. And this is one of those movies where you actually see the Specs when he kills Garza. He pushes the bookcase over and it lands on Garza and kills him. You don't see
Yeah,
a
I
lot of
wasn't
stuff like that
expecting
in these
that.
movies.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and it what I do like about this too is it affected Specs. Like he's sitting outside and he's shaken up. Usually you don't see that in horror movies. Usually the person kills him, they're like, whatever, he was a bad guy. But
Yeah.
Specs is shaken up about this. And Elise has to calm him down, like, you did the right thing. That was a monster. It wasn't a man. Um, and so the last thing I want to say about this one is the ending, I think, is great when the dad does have that moment of redemption when they're in the further. And you see that the key monster had been controlling her dad essentially the whole time. And the mom comes and is like, "Get away from my little girl." And I love that family ending to this movie. I thought that was really good. So,
Yeah.
number three for me is also the last key. Anything you'd like to add before we move on to our number twos?
Oh, I was just gonna say, what a kind of like a sad story for Elise, though. And I
Yeah.
think that one of the interesting things about the story is, I do talk about how we lose some of those through lines, right, in terms of, James Wan not directing, in terms of some of the music and the cinematography, but the through line, aside from the cast, which includes Lee Winnell, is also Lee Winnell behind the scenes as a
Yeah.
writer. He crafted all these stories and these characters, and so, but it is kind of sad for Elise because we do see her obviously pass away in the first film. She's able to assist through the further, but then as we get into 3 and 4, we realize, she loses her husband. She had,
Mm-hmm.
then we go further and we realize that she was abused when she was younger. That she loses her mother and, really her father to this ghost
Yeah.
or this demon. So it's just it is a tragedy, but it is a very interesting story.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. And I love that now we do have Insidious 5 coming out, I believe in 2021. It may have been pushed back to 2022. That I'm not 100% sure of, but I'm very interested to see where the story's going to go from here.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, we got Patrick Wilson directing. It's
Mm-hmm.
gonna, it's going to feature him and his son, and it's going to be, obviously 10 or more years later. And yeah, curious to see what comes back.
Yeah. Yeah. This is one of those franchises where I really don't mind another sequel. I, I've said this at the top, but this is one of those franchises where I can watch them and be extremely happy if one of them's on. I won't change it. I just did one of these on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and I cannot say the same thing about that franchise. There's plenty of those ones. I'd be
Yeah.
happy if I'd never seen them again. So let's go on to our number two. Your number two will be.
My number two is definitely Insidious Chapter 3. And it's interesting because we see these two movies a little bit differently,
Mhm.
and I see very few movies where and I think that's what Lee Winnell does such a good job with is subverting expectations. We expect it to go a certain way, he gives us something else. It may not always work for us. Like I said, in the case of for you, the demon who wears the mask doesn't, it doesn't really work. But for me, I love the fact that we see ghosts who are so so out there, and that they're trying to cause harm. They're trying to let you know they're evil, they're scary, they're trying to cause you harm. And this one does it in such a sneaky way, and in such a terrible way, because it preys on your loneliness and sadness. And for me, I think it's one of the most effective ghosts and creepy ghosts or demons that I've seen in anything. There is the where he has Quinn, and he's just rubbing the side of
Yeah.
her head, and you can see she's comforted because she thinks she's with her mother.
Hmm.
To me, it's absolutely terrifying. Is that you think you've lost your mother or your loved one, you think you're with them, and it's really this demon that is just taking you. And like I said, even though not necessarily my favorite of the franchise, because that'll be coming soon, number one. I mean, I think this movie has plenty of jump scares, and I think another thing too is, right, we're seeing this is Lee Winnell's first movie, and we
Yeah.
see he is, and I could say even then, a master of horror. You can see how he's able to execute it there. We know how he does it behind the scenes. We see what he's able to do with the Invisible Man, and and this is his first feature film, so I think it was something special.
See, and that's why I love doing this, because if I'm learning things from you, you're learning things from me, and it is cool to get somebody else's perspective on the exact same movie where we're completely different. And that to me is another reason why I love doing these and why it's so much fun, and why I don't want to know your list beforehand, because I want to learn these things as we're going. And which brings me to my number two, which is your least favorite, Insidious Chapter 2. This one to me is, I love the possessed Josh. I love how he's slowly deteriorating. His teeth are falling out. He's becoming the Black Bride. He's becoming Parker. And one scene that really got me when we were in the cinema watching it is when you got young Josh and he's in the hospital with his mom, and he's looking at the machine, and then he turns around and Parker has sat up in the bed, and he grabs him right there. Like that was a really good jump scare for me. And I remember people in the theater, like 4 or 5 different women screaming and guys going, oh, all at the same time. And so maybe that's why that affects me a little bit more. Finding out that the Black Bride is a male, I love how they threw that in there. You didn't see that coming, obviously. The Parker's mom jump scare when Renee's walking around the house and she sees her singing row, row, row your boat, and then she gets up and walks away, and then she's just gone, but then she's back and don't you dare, and she slaps her.
Slaps her to the floor. Yeah.
That was a good one. Another scene that really creeped me out, and it's not that over the top jump scare or anything like that, but when they're in the further at the end, and he's like, there's someone in front of you, and it's that guy in like a diaper, and he's just like, he's got your baby, he's got your baby. Like, and then they go back to the first one, and you see that Josh was the one that was going through the house in the first one. I really did enjoy that a lot. Another big scene for me is when you find out that it really is Parker Crane inside Josh. He's like, why don't you ask your dice what I got behind my back? And he's like, what does Parker Crane have behind his back? And he drops the dice and it says knife. That's another big one for me. And Dalton, when he's swarmed in the further, when you got all the girl comes out of the closet and she's talking into the soup can with the string, but it's delayed. And then Dalton looks up and he's outside of his body again, and all the things are trying to get him. That's one of my favorite further moments in the whole franchise. But the only real big negative I could say about this movie, and I don't know why it bothers me so much, but when younger Elise, Lindsay Syme, is talking and they voiced her, that part really, really bothered me. And I don't know why it bothers me so bad, but it just really, Lynn Shay, like they use Lynn
Yeah.
Shay's actual voice over
Yeah.
top. And I don't know why it irritates me so bad, but that just really bothers me. And I get Josh was possessed by Parker Crane, but how was it not his hands? They said, oh, well, it wasn't his fingerprints that killed Elise around her neck. How? She still used his body, or
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
still used his body.
Yeah, it's definitely, you have to, it's what do you call it? It's one of those like movie magic type,
Yeah.
moments where they'd be like, well, it's all supernatural anyway. So even though it was his hand, she, came through to him. And, like I said, it does, like I said, it is a little, the second one's definitely a little challenging there. But, but like I said, these are all good movies. They're all
Yeah.
fun movies. Something else I wanted to mention, because you reminded me when you talked about the soup cans, is that it's interesting that all of these kind of have an object that helps with scares. Excuse me. At least in
Yes.
all the sequels, we have there's the bell in 3, there's
Hmm.
the whistle in 4,
Whistle.
and they do such a great job of having these items, and then it's like, and they're able to build such tension with them, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the fact that you bring up the whistle because I wanted to bring that up during the last key. How something that a lot of us when we were kids would find so insignificant, they make such a huge part of this movie, not just for the human relationship between Elise and her brother, but the ghost is using it to save the life of that young girl that's down in the that Garza has taken,
Yeah.
And when they're down there in the last key and they find her, and you got not Specs, but the other guy, why can't I,
Tucker.
Tucker. Yeah, I was blanking
Yeah.
on his name. Tucker's like, that's not a ghost. That's a real, and the little,
Yeah.
she's doing this and then she stands up and she's like, help me. Like that whole scene is so powerful because that's when you first start to realize, like, oh my God, what's going on with this guy? This Garza guy's not all, you knew he wasn't okay. But at this
Yeah.
point, you really knew something really bad is going on here. So I'm glad you brought the whistle up because that's a scene I did want to talk about. But we are at our number one, and I don't think it's any surprise to anybody that we share the same number one. Why don't you talk about Insidious a little bit for us?
Okay, so I mean, Insidious is this is the one that kicked it off. There was no way this
Mhm.
couldn't be number one. To me, it's one of my favorite and one of the best movies of the 2010s.
Yeah.
I'd go as far to say as I think it's one of the best horror movies ever made.
Mhm.
And the reason is because, and some people will say, oh well, it's similar to this or it's similar to that. I know when it first came out, it was similar to Poltergeist. People are saying, but I think what masters of their craft are able to do when it comes to filmmaking is they will take a familiar concept and then they will execute it so well and in different ways that just set it above everything else, right? So making a haunted house movie, fairly straightforward. But what James Wan's able to do is he's able to, he first of all, he doesn't draw it out.
Mhm.
You'd see a lot of movies, and slow burn movies were really, getting popular around that time again. And, it was how do we build tension and then have a real kick ass ending? But what he did was he gave us scares from almost, the very beginning. And what they are, they're these small segments. It's like, a lot of tension and a scare, a lot of tension and a scare, and you get so many of those that it's almost like you're at a haunted attraction. And
Yeah.
so, and he builds different types of scares. We see him do the same thing in The Conjuring too. And I think, and that's what he's really excellent at. He builds tension. As good as anyone else. I had talked about another movie the other day where I was comparing it to Hitchcock in terms of suspense, and really, that's equally, people talk about jump scares, and yes, you can have a loud sound, but it's building that tension, and building that suspense that's not easy to do, and James Wan makes it look easy.
Mhm.
The other thing I would say is that there are a lot of things that people may not pay attention to initially, like the score and the sound design. And I mean, the score is unique. It is unnerving, and with like the violin and the piano,
Mhm.
and they are able to use it in such a way that it adds to the scares and it adds to the creepiness. But then also it's things like sound design. If you notice, when they're in the bedroom and the fans going, it's just do, 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 do. And that adds to the tension because it's almost like a heartbeat. And there are
Yes.
other sound elements that make it so great. And then when you add the cinematography and you add that contrast of lighting, when they go to the further, everything isn't dark. It's kind of this wonderful blue. You have the
Mhm.
light that they're holding that lights everything up. You even see the ghosts in the further, specifically in Insidious 1 and 2, they're bright.
Yes.
They're not blended into the atmosphere, and I think there's something really unnerving about that. They almost look like they're part of a stage play,
Yeah.
especially along with the music. I mean, I could talk about this forever, but then also, the switch up on the ending, I think that's where, for me, it really works because you expect it to follow this red demon the whole time. That would be your traditional story, and he switches it up. So it's all been about the bride in black. And,
Yes.
leaving it with this um, ambiguous ending, which before there was a franchise, I interpreted it as a downer. I'm like, well, the bride in black has taken over and now has killed Elise, who's the only one who could tell. He or she is going to kill the rest of the people in the house. Also, open for interpretation is, did the red demon make it into their son? Because if you watch
Right.
that movie, there is no clear answer as to that. What you do is you see the camera and it goes into both of the characters from a first person point of view, so you never see who comes out.
Right.
And then lastly, I have to, we didn't talk about Rose Byrne or Barbara Hershey, who are, a huge part of this. I know we've talked because Patrick Wilson was in the sequel, and
Mhm.
obviously Tucker and Specs and Elise, but I mean the characters. But this is a great ensemble. Everyone brings something to the table here, and Ty Simpkins as well. And they just are all, they're all excellent. It was some excellent casting. They really meshed together. This is, for me, this is a perfect horror movie. I could keep going.
And one thing you're talking about, like with the score, even the use of the Tiny Tim song, the tiptoe through the tulips,
Yeah.
that it's such a child's song. And this movie makes that terrifying. And you were talking about the suspense of this movie. This is one of those movies that, like you said, even when you're not expecting to be scared, they'll do one after another. Like when they're at the table and the mom's talking about the dream and how she went in and she asked the demon, "What did you want?" And the demon does that weird point over at Dalton. And then we cut back and she's still kind of shaken up and she looks over at Josh and the red devil's right behind her. And you get that instant jump scare again. And
It's
that's
one of the
another scene.
greatest jump scares of all time. Yeah, I completely forgot to
Absolutely
mention
is.
that, but yeah, it really is one of the best jump scares of all time.
Oh, absolutely. That's one that you just did not see coming at all. And um, I also love another scare in this movie that I really enjoy that I don't think is talked about enough is when you got the guy outside the window and he's walking back and forth, and then he's inside the house,
Yeah.
on his next trip back, and he looks over at her. That's another one that just, got me to my core the first time I seen this movie. And something that you had brought up that I want to talk about. This isn't your typical haunted house story because at the beginning they think the house is haunted and they do what a real person would do and they move out.
Exactly. Yeah.
They leave. The things that we always say when we're watching a haunted movie, like just leave the house. They do it. And this is where you find out the house isn't haunted. Your son is haunted. And I thought that was brilliant. Another jump scare I love is when Tucker has that camera thing and he's in the hallway. And the way they do the jump scare when he's going through the different colors and you see the girls in the white dresses, and that's not the jump scare. They sit there for about a quarter of a second. Then they do that twisted smile and the music kicks. That's when he jumps back. He's like, we need to call Elise right now. Um, and then obviously, like when they're in the further and you have the red devil sharpening his nails and the Tiny Tim song is playing and Josh finally finds Dalton and then Dalton's like, Dad, he's looking, and it goes up to the window and you see him just on the window and then they start running away from him throughout the further. Perfect. It's perfect. And I love the shock of Elise's death, like you were talking about. You really at first feel this is a happy ending, and then he goes to grab the picture and she takes the picture and, why would you do that? You know how I feel about that. And he's choking her out. It just, that part, like you said, the first time you watch this, you're like, if this was a standalone film, that would be the perfect ending to this film because it's completely ambiguous. You don't know if the red devil got Dalton. You obviously know, the black bride got Josh, but the only con I can say about this movie, and I've said it since the first time I seen it, is the way the red devil looks. Obviously he gets compared, you know what I
The
mean?
Darth Maul,
It's,
it's
yeah,
it's
the
it's
Darth
become
Maul
my one.
comparisons,
Yeah.
and I see it, and it is a bummer, but if that's the only negative you can find in a movie is the makeup design of a certain character, you've done something right. And I completely agree with you where I put this in my top 3 horror movies of the 2010s alongside of The Conjuring and I'm a big Cabin in the Woods fan.
Yeah,
So those three, I think, are three of my favorite horror movies. Not best, three of my favorite horror movies of the 2010s. And this is one that, like I said, I'm very much looking forward to the sequel of Part 5. And I would love to have you back on to talk about that once we have that out on, VOD or home video, so we can,
100%. Yeah.
have that conversation. So, everybody, anything you'd like to add before we sign off, my friend?
Oh no, just thanks for having me. I'm glad this was a perfect opportunity to revisit them. I had a chance to
Yes.
watch them. I watched them with my brother-in-law and my wife, who watched different movies, and my sister as well. So I got to see them kind of experience and jump around. My sister had when she had a hoodie on, she had pulled it all the way up for most of what is it called, The Last Key. So it was funny to
Yeah.
watch that and to see how they experience it. And yeah, and I love watching these ones as well. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And really hoping to work with you again in the future. Everybody else, remember, check these links down here in the description. You're not going to regret it. This is one of my favorite. I have their notifications turned on Twitter. I find out everything that all my horror news. This is one of my biggest places I get them. So I appreciate you coming on. Don't go anywhere. Got a couple more questions for you. Everybody else, keep talking horror. Stay what you are, and we'll see you guys soon.